Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you the politics, the pedagogy, and the practice around public education. And of course, as always, we have hot topics to share. And with us today, we have asked Kathy Ward, our friend, who also happens to be very well versed in public ed. She used to be a teacher and politics. She used to be commissioner. And then now she's a weekly podcaster and ex-radio show. So come on, Kathy Ward, come on in and let's discuss the latest hot topic that it's in Texas, but this is not really a Texas issue. This is one state of many that has passed laws having to do with teaching. They call it CRT, and I really wish they wouldn't, but let me finish that and then I'll get on that thought. Culture and diversity through the historical lens, and they've really tried to make that a little bit tighter to the point where it's causing great confusion. But let me mention why I think CRT is wrong. As you've had on your show a guest who actually read to the end of the books about CRT, and CRT is not about culture and diversity, is it?
Right, and it was very eye-opening to me. And this is a friend of the show who is Jewish, and literally did his homework. Didn't just get sound bites from social media. He read the books. He read the documentation, and so even for those who were already skeptical of CRT, it was very eye-opening. Very eye-opening.
So to do a spoiler alert, really, I'll tell you the end of the CRT book, and that is that it's not about culture and diversity. It's about economic equality. And that sounds really nice, doesn't it? Isn't that a great term, economic equality?
In a utopian society, it's lovely if we've all won $1 million.
Yeah, or we all were poor together, right?
Right, but that's just not how life works, you
know.
No,
and remember, they keep saying, and to give the media their due, they do keep saying CRT is a master's level curriculum.
Oh, yes.
What the media has done is to take hostage that CRT term and place it over culture and diversity. And so that's one of those things that I like to always say as much as I can, because it just gives the wrong impression that we shouldn't be teaching CRT. Well, you're right, we shouldn't be teaching CRT, but most people are thinking we shouldn't be teaching culture and diversity, when in fact we shouldn't be teaching how socialism is going to cure all our ills, right?
Exactly.
Nobody talks about that, but
we're America. So there you go. The land of opportunity, and it's one of those things that you look at it, and some people can be born into the best circumstances and they end up having trouble after trouble after trouble. And then you've got other people, and we've had a number of success stories on our show, where you've got people who were born into really tough situations. Well, JP and I had a young man who had been in JP's truancy court back in the day. He's now, I don't even know if he's 30 yet, and he's an author getting ready to have a book turned into a movie.
Wow, that is cool.
Well, so this is the land of opportunity.
So you're reminding me, 2 years ago, I think it was, Lily Bell, who was running for city council in Plano, Texas, came to one of my schools and did a sort of a bio lesson on growing up in communist China.
And she actually had been elected to city council when she did that lecture at your school.
She'd already, but she'd been, I think, yes. And so it was eye-opening to see the impact of her story on my mostly immigrant population kids. Because those kids have been, especially some of our Hispanic kids, they're being fed in the home that, America is not as great because of immigration issues and so forth. There's a lot tied up around the Hispanic culture. You have divisions of those who have been here a long time, many generations, and those that are recent generations right here. And so there's a misalignment in thinking within the Hispanic culture. But you have a lot of negative, oftentimes negative thoughts around the United States and how we're treating immigrants and so forth. And so it was interesting having Lily come and talk about the fact that she grew up in a place where you had no rights. You literally had no rights. And she asked them, the kids afterwards, she said, do you feel a little bit better about living in America? And they all, yeah.
It was amazing. That was really one of the more profound, situations I've been in a classroom. And I was so glad that you allowed me to sit in that day on that, because I watched the kids' body language, and these were high school government students, watched their body language, saw some eye rolling, some, everybody knows the oh brother look, on these kids' faces. I remember when she talked about her and her brother sharing one toy, which was a wooden truck. And all of a sudden, literally, you could have heard a pin drop in that classroom. It was fascinating to see them come around to realize we are very fortunate here in America.
And really, the work that their parents did not belong to them. Yep. They got to keep some of it, but they didn't get to keep most of it. And that's right. The same I've read in Cuba today. It is very similar. Matter of fact, there's a whole sort of new pattern of living, and I shouldn't say new because it's been going on since they became communist. It's developed over time in the last 50 years, or whatever time Fidel Castro went in. But there's a survival behavior that happens in communist China. I saw it in the Soviet Union when I was there in 1975 and 1978. Right. And, getting in lines, you don't know what they're selling, but you get in because you might need it. Right. But in Cuba, for example, most of your day is spent hunting down items that if you can't use them, you can use to trade for other things that you do need.
Right. To barter. Yeah.
It's a barter society, because you don't know when you will be able to get your hands on things in a regular way, which frankly, we used to be able to count on here, but with our supply chain issues, we already are sort of evolving a little bit.
You're right. Well, they're talking about Christmas presents. They're talking about different things not being available. And I've seen with some of the normal stores I shop at that I've been like, it was interesting. There was this whole section was gone. Was there an issue? And they said, we don't have the distribution chain. They've just been very honest. They're like, we were supposed to have had that item 2 days ago and been fully stocked. So yeah, that you get a little taste of that. And can you imagine living in a like that?
Yeah, I was at a store today. I was looking for something. I went to the person behind the counter, and they used that word that I'm really dreading. It should be in soon.
Yeah.
Should, right? But yeah. So my wanting to bring this up is because Carroll ISD, which is somewhat of a local district in this area in Texas, North Texas, was trying to do a training around House Bill 3979, which I will read the summary of House Bill 3979, which is really sort of short and sweet, but very powerful, right? And that is, I have so many things saved up on here. It was a law passed in May 2021 that restricts how teachers discuss controversial issues, bans them from saying that slavery constitutes the true founding of the United States, and prohibits schools from awarding credit for students engaging in any kind of political advocacy. The political advocacy one, I want to touch on that maybe another time. I don't know.
So that's a whole other topic. Exactly.
It is. Yes. But it discusses controversial issues. So now we have districts like Carroll ISD who is saying to teachers, if you're going to teach something controversial, then have an alternate perspective ready for the kids. And so somebody, teacher raised their hand, and the poor curriculum person, very high up person, and did not know that this was being videotaped by somebody in the audience. And
Always assume you're being videotaped.
and so she
always,
gave sort of
always assume you're being.
she gave this off the cuff answer of the Holocaust. Well, you can imagine the uproar that that's caused nationwide. This has gone from Carroll ISD in Little Texas to all over the country, because is the Holocaust something that we need to have an alternate perspective on?
It's
Really?
history. It's history. You know, I mean, look how many Jewish people we lost. That's, you know, ask somebody who you've met in your lifetime who wears the tattoo from having been part of a concentration camp. There is no alternate perspective to that.
No, and that's what they were, the teachers, you know, bless their heart, raising their hand saying, you want me to teach that the Nazi perspective was okay? I mean, and so this is not really about the Holocaust, or, you know, it's about the quandary, the conundrum that we have put in the hands of our teachers and evidently curriculum training staff. Right. Because they just don't, how do you help teachers through that quagmire of what is safe to teach now and what isn't? And then, of course, you have cultural perspectives. You have African-American teachers in high school social studies history position that are going to feel very comfortable teaching about slavery. And then you have white teachers who maybe aren't going to feel so comfortable. And so how do we transcend that so that we do send a message to all of our kids, right? Because very few of us teach an all white or all black or all Hispanic class anymore, right? We're really, really mixed.
Well, the great thing, we're a diverse country, and that's great, and our classrooms reflect that. And my thing is, you've got to be very careful, because if you're teaching history, you stick to the facts, you teach history. And then that's where I think that political activism, which, I would, boy, when you do that show, I would love to be guest on that show, because that's a whole nother thing. And we've got to be so careful. And, you know, you had mentioned about, on JP Caffey and the Crew, you had mentioned that, you know, a younger teacher's perspective versus somebody who's been teaching for 20 or so years, that they may have different ideas because of the age they were raised in, where Google is at your fingertips and Twitter is how you get your news.
And we also talked about the fact that we have everybody, but we'll stick to teachers in this case, being fed through the Facebook and internet algorithms of what they've been searching most for, right? And so the truth as they know it is one way, but is that the correct way? We might say, is
that really the truth, or is that just, again, somebody's opinion?
And that's, we most see that in colleges, where the professors tend to give their very strong opinion about how one party is maybe not as good as another party. And is that really their business to be doing that? I would say no.
No, you go to school to be educated, to learn. Well, obviously, you and I went to school to become educators, and I needed to know how to, especially I was being trained to be a special education teacher. I needed to know how to diffuse a situation if an emotionally disturbed kid, one of the kids who had maybe some severe behavioral issues, if they were choking one of your fellow teachers, what did you do to diffuse that situation and protect the child, yourself, and that other teacher? I had that situation happen to me. So I was very glad that in my education, I learned all of the things that were going to go with me and that I was going to need, as arrows in my quiver for being a special education teacher.
But how long ago was that? And do we have
a long time ago, Dr.
Do we need to put some new arrows in the quiver that has to do with, and you and I had talked about this on your show, that I think we need to train all staff in the awareness of how the internet picks up on the pattern of our searches, of our interest areas, and just feeds us that. And maybe, just maybe, it skews the brain a little bit to the point where we no longer accept things that may actually be truly factual. And
Right.
so should we be asking districts to add that to their beginning of the year training as a reminder of the importance of having neutral news resources? And that's something else. We're now having to train teachers on how to train kids to find
Right.
neutral, factual resources, right? When they're doing their project-based learning,
Right.
and they're having to research as researchers around their area of need and their problem that they have
Right.
to solve, right, in their project. And so I think before they can do that to the kids, I think we have to do it to the teachers as far as
You're
helping
right.
them stay more neutral.
I think maybe if, and again, then really, stick to, if you're an algebra teacher, nobody needs to know where you stand, on the political issue of the day. Stick to what your expertise is. But then again, we do have to recognize the fact that we do have a generation coming through and teaching who are they were born with an iPhone, an iPad, some type of device in their hands as a toddler. So does this become part of that as we evolve as a society? We have to evolve in education, which sometimes we have a hard time. I know when I was an educator, the last thing I wanted was some kind of change. So is this a professional development service that's for new teachers, maybe more in depth, for the younger, newer teachers coming out of school? And then for those teachers who are established teachers who have been around, notice I did not say older teachers, established teachers who have been around.
Veteran.
There you go. And, then is it a reminder that when you're researching something that could be controversial and you want to give your students some type of knowledge on this, remember, extend your search, because your phone's picking up on what movies you like and what political feeds you watch and things of that nature. So
it can be as simple as choosing MSNBC versus Fox.
Exactly.
As simple as that. If you mostly listen to one or the other, you will get fed political ideology that represents what each of those media streams are streaming.
Right. That's a good point.
That's how dangerous that is.
It may be that simple. Yeah.
And so thank you.
If it were that simple, Dr. Good.
Well, speaking about things that are not simple, October is mental health and depression month, and I'll separate that from May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, but October adds the depression in, and that's really hit home to my family. We unfortunately had a suicide in our family in the last couple of weeks, and I've been amazed by the information that the survivors of this loved one were able to get. And so I brought you on for this part as well, because you've been doing years of mental health awareness. Matter of fact, on your radio show, and it used to be every Tuesday,
right,
Mental Health Awareness Day. But I still caught you off guard when I came to you with the information that I had.
You absolutely did. And again, and full disclaimer, I by no means am any type of mental health expert in any way, shape, or form. I do have family members who have dealt with bipolar, depression, anxiety, the list goes on. But that's one of the things JP and I have always been very passionate about, is bringing that information and just at least talking about it. You caught me completely off guard with the information that you found.
So I'm going to speak from a survivor standpoint now, as opposed to awareness and trying to and prevention, because actually there's, matter of fact, it was interesting to find out that there's a little bit of tension between the prevention folks and the folks who handle the survivors. Isn't that interesting?
Interesting.
And so, first of all, there's a specialist, and they're called a thanatologist, and it's a specialist in death, dying, and bereavement. It's a special certification. They're not a counselor. This is this is to help understand, especially in the path of committed suicides. That's I'm sorry, completed. They don't use committed. They used died by suicide or completed suicide. That's what university professors who deal in this, who are experts in this, that's the term they use. And oftentimes what they have found with people who commit suicide is that they, in retrospect, one can look back and see some of these terms. For example, there's a term called perseveration. Perseveration cognition is a collective term in psychology for continuous thinking about negative events in the past or in the future. Like they worry a lot, they brood over either past events or upcoming events, and they can't stop their minds wandering about those negative topics. And that combined with anhedonia. Anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure, and it's a common symptom of depression as well as other mental health disorders. Most people understand what pleasure feels like. They expect certain things in life to make them happy, but by the time some people get through their mental health journey process, they no longer feel pleasure in anything. And we saw that.
I didn't know that was the thing.
We saw that. So as far as brain function and suicide, the executive cortex, which is in the brain, is the logic center of the brain, and it starts to decline after a lot of time going through anxiety and depression. The constant wear and tear of the anxiety and depression eats away at it, and it causes that person to stop being able to think logically, because it eats at the logic center of the brain. So the depression overpowers the person until they get too tired to fight. And we heard that message that he was tired. And some of my family, they don't like this term, but this is, I've read this in a couple different books, murdered by depression and anxiety. Wow. So there's two types of grievers. There's intuitive grievers, most are women. And then there's instrumental grievers, most are men. The intuitive grievers process everything through their feelings. They don't need a whole lot of information. Like I needed a lot of information. I went out and sought more because I was trying to wrap my brain around this. And the intuitive griever, again, mostly women, but I've seen within this family over the last 2 weeks, I've seen men who are intuitives, and they think everyone is intuitive like them. They think that everybody should grieve or does grieve the way they do. And the instrumental griever, most are men. They want to fix the problem, right? They always process information through thoughts. And most men and people like myself, we categorize our topics, our professional life, our private life, our business, our faith. These are all little buckets in our brains that we can. And so I always used to joke about the fact that I was a very successful teacher because when I got to school, I could turn off my personal life and teach and function. Then when I got home, I could turn off my professional life and be a mother and a wife. And so not everybody can do that. So we process very internally. We may or may not share externally. A lot of men don't. And the intuitives resent because there's so much misinformation or no information about grieving.
Right.
The intuitive grievers resent oftentimes their spouse, their male spouse, right? For not showing feelings. You don't feel like I do, this loss. And it's caused divorces. How many times have we heard of somebody dying in the family and there's a divorce, right?
Yes.
A child dies and the couple can't handle it. And a lot of times it's because the wife or the intuitive griever resented and thought that the instrumental griever that they didn't know was an instrumental griever wasn't feeling as sad and as awful as they were. And
they just didn't show it.
Exactly.
So it sounds like, yeah. And so I think I think that's a really excellent point that you make, because you can't assume that you know what the other person is feeling.
And
And
yet,
we
with that
all
tree,
jump to that conclusion, Dr. Good. We do it in everyday life.
yes, we do.
So I can't even imagine how much you would do that in the situation, where you have a family member who's taken their life. That's fascinating.
Something else that came up that was interesting is, how we always talk about the 5 stages of grief:
Yes.
acceptance, it's out.
Really?
So the author of that was so sorry that was misinterpreted. Yeah, she's gone on record by saying, she had done a quick study, only 200 people, and she had come up with these stages, and it got blown out of proportion. It's all over the place, and she never intended the 5 stages of grief to get out like that and to be so solidified in people's minds. So that was interesting to learn that, because we hang our hats. Oh, they're going through denial. Now they're going through the anger stage. Now accept it. But and a lot of it is because grieving is a process and a journey, and it's not first you do this, then you do this. That it's not. And so that was interesting.
Wow.
So here's some reminders for the ones left behind. Most movies and TV tell us that we must be externally emotional grievers. They, because that's all we see, right? Oh, right.
That's what gets you the Oscar in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mourning is getting grief out in a healthy way. And you should have small rituals for mourning. And there's a nonprofit called mygriefandloss.org. I'll put that in the comments. And they're a nonprofit. They are happy to share their information. You can give a donation. She spent 2 hours with us, and she did not charge us a penny. Culture also influences grief. So, in some cultures, throwing yourself on the casket and crying and so forth, that's considered normal grieving.
Right.
In some cultures, if you don't do it, then, you're obviously a hard-hearted hand, right? And so there's different culture expectations around grieving in different countries. And I have a website on that too. You can grieve within your own personality. You can be an intuitive and yet be that quiet intuitive, because you're shy and you're internal person anyway, but you can still be intuitive. And so we grieve to the depth of the relationship we had with that person.
But what does that that mean for each individual person? So because one person didn't love the person more than the other. So what does that mean?
So what that means is, if you lost a son or daughter, for example, you're going to grieve deeper than if you lost a family friend.
Okay.
And
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so, but a lot of people don't give themselves permission to understand that it's okay for you to sort of get over it pretty fast. If your 20-year neighbor died of a heart attack, you love that person, you used to play cards with them, but you're not going to grieve to the same extent as if you lost a son, a daughter, a spouse, and so forth.
Right.
And so it's okay to understand that. And one of the things that was helpful was that knowing that if love could have saved that person, it would have saved him. But biology won, not love.
Right.
And that was very helpful to understand. His last act doesn't define him, and it doesn't define us. And, there's that stigma around suicide.
Right.
And darn it, we need to get better at getting that counselor on our payroll, like we do the family lawyer.
Right.
Somebody made the suggestion. Was it you who said we should go once a year and do a mental health checkup at the doctor?
You and I talked about that this past week on JP, Kathy, and the crew. And I can't take credit for it. I've had a number of health experts on the show said, well, you're going to get your cholesterol checked, which obviously I don't want anybody to say, yes, you do need to go and do things of that nature. Make sure, you've got everything, the levels should be where they are, and that once a year check. Why don't you go and just check in, even if it's with, a therapist or somebody who's a counselor at the church, and just say, hey, had a lot going on this year. sometimes just sharing with somebody who is not your best friend, not your spouse, not your kids, not somebody who hears you complain or not complain all the time. What's
Yeah.
wrong with that?
You
There's
know,
some great advice.
since we talked about that, I've been doing some thinking about maybe wouldn't it be interesting if you had a psychologist or a counselor, somebody who's attached to a medical facility, that part of their role, or maybe their only role, is to do 15-minute, 30-minute, once a year checkups with people, and it can be as easy as saying, "Hey, what were your blimps this year?"
Right.
And if the what's coming out of their mouths is blimpy enough, that would cause a little
There's
bit of,
maybe a red flag. Well, and I
yeah.
think, and you and I might have talked about this on a prior show when we were talking about pediatricians, or maybe when we had, I'm trying to remember, but for some reason it seems familiar with having spoken with you about this, that I had noticed the last few years. Now my daughter's over 18 now. My son still goes to a pediatrician. And I noticed a few years ago, before my daughter turned 18, and they still do it to this day at the pediatrician's office where I take my kids, they give like an iPad tablet device. The kid sits in the room and answers the questions,
Hmm.
and they're all mental health questions. The parent who's with their minor child at the doctor's office answers questions. And I had asked them outside of being in front of my kids. I said, I hadn't noticed that before. And they said, we're checking in to make sure maybe you don't, need to be referred to a psychologist or a therapist or some. That was a mental health check that was private. It's private for the kid. It's private for the parent. So if they get a parent checking a bunch of yeses and the kid's in denial on everything, I would imagine they pull you aside and talk to you. Or maybe your child feels comfortable on a tablet, which they're so used to, saying, I need help. I'm having dark thoughts of not being here. Then again, you've got that opportunity. So I've always thought that was North Dallas Pediatrics. They're a phenomenal group. And I always have appreciated that they did that. Maybe that's something that
Needs to become standard
yeah,
practice. Yeah,
and for adults like us, I mean,
yeah,
literally, you can do something that just takes 5 or 10 minutes, but it may make your quality of life better, or it may save your life.
yeah. So I appreciate you letting me sort of give you new information, because
Thank
you
you.
are a conduit to others,
Thank
and
you. Thank
you can help me carry this message about how to help those left behind. It's not only how to help those with mental health issues, but how to help those left behind
Thank
because
you
of
very
mental
much.
health.
I'm honored that you allowed me to be on for this segment, Dr. Good. Thank you very much. And we are praying for your family.
Thank you. Well, as always, we are at the end of our show. Thank you, Kathy Ward, for being on and for adding so much, as you always do, with
Thank
your
you.
background. It just enriches the show. So thank you. And thank you, everyone. We'll come back next week. Don't forget, if you missed the show, you can watch it anytime, or the Thursday rebroadcast at 6. Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.